Something that I want to address, because I received two questions about this today, so I feel like this is a sign, is that I received two different questions about children and their behavior. And what often happens is that the information that's given to me is always about the child's behavior. So when you are looking at behavior in terms of a three-term contingency, there's an antecedent, what happens right before the behavior. There is the behavior, that's what the person does or says, which can be anything. And then there's the consequence, what we do after the behavior. And the consequence is what is going to determine, will that behavior happen again in the future, or will it decrease, or will it stop? And so the most important piece of information that's going to tell us why something is happening and if it's going to happen again in the future is actually the antecedent, what happened right before the behavior, and the consequence, what happened right after the behavior. The behavior, the B, that middle part, is actually the least important piece of information because it doesn't give us any information on why something's happening and why it keeps happening. So for example, let's say I tell you Johnny hit Mary, okay? Now, if I were to say, is that a good thing or a not so good thing? I think most people would probably say that's not great because he hit her. But the only piece of information you had in that scenario is the behavior. That's what Johnny did. However, if I were to tell you the antecedent, what happened right before Johnny exhibited that behavior was I told Johnny, hey, Johnny, give Mary a high five. So he essentially hit her. That's going to change your response as to if Johnny hitting Mary was a good thing or a not so good thing. So that didn't give us any information as to Johnny hitting Mary. We only had information once you knew what the antecedent was. In a different scenario, if I said, I told Johnny to give Mary the toy dog, and then Johnny hit Mary, now that your response is going to be different as to if that were a good thing or a not so good thing. So in that scenario, Johnny hitting Mary was not so good, but you needed to know what happened right before he hit her. And so we don't respond to all behavior the same, as you could see from that scenario that I just gave you before. We respond to behavior not by what it looks like, not by what the child did, but we respond to behavior based on why it's happening, what happened right before the child exhibited that behavior, whether it's a good behavior or not so good behavior. If you were to give one treatment for a behavior, so for example, let's say the behavior is Susie yelled, and you say, okay, every time Susie yells, we're going to ignore her. But you're treating that behavior based on the behavior, what Susie's doing. So if Susie's yelling to get out of work, and now you ignore her, then you're not providing an effective consequence because Susie yelling is working. She's getting out of work. And if you say every time Susie yells, again, the consequence is that we're ignoring her and Susie's yelling for attention, then sure, ignoring her would be effective, one would assume. So to sum this up, what I'm trying to say is when we're looking at why something's happening and how to treat it, we're not looking at the behavior. Sure, that's helpful, but what we really want to know is what happened right before the behavior occurred. That's going to tell us why it's happening. And the consequence, what happened right after the behavior, is going to tell us why it keeps happening or it doesn't keep happening. You know, if you go to a doctor because your arm hurts, the doctor doesn't provide everybody whose arm hurts the same treatment. He has to look at your arm. Somebody might need a sling. Somebody might need physical therapy. Somebody might have, I don't know. I don't know why somebody might have hurt their arm, but everybody that has arm pain doesn't get the same treatment. Just like in behavior analysis, everybody that exhibits the same behavior doesn't get the same treatment. We have to look at why it's happening. And then finally, something that's really important to consider is that anytime problem behavior is happening, it's because there's a skill deficit. So there's something that we need to teach that learner instead of exhibiting that behavior. So if your learner, for example, is hitting because they maybe because they want something, then we need to teach them how to appropriately ask for that. Or maybe they're hitting because, you know, it's not their turn. Maybe we need to work on accepting no or teaching your child to wait. There are so many different reasons why something can be happening, but we want to also make sure that we're teaching something when problem behavior is happening.